Now that you know how to select elements on a web page, you're ready to start applying CSS properties to them. In the next two videos, we're going to take a look at some CSS properties that can help us lay out our page elements. Before we get to the CSS properties, I'm going to introduce a new tag here called the div tag, which you can see right here and right here. You can think of the div tag as sort of a generalized page element. Div is short for division, and the div tag is intended to give more structure to our page and divide up elements into distinct groups that we can apply styling to. Here we have what's called a wrapper div, which is just a div with the ID wrapper. It's very common for websites to center their content on the page using a wrapper div and a few simple CSS tricks. The wrapper div essentially just wraps all the content on the page and makes it easy to position. Now let's switch over to the browser. Here you can see that our web page has a light gray background and our wrapper div has a black background. We'll be using this black box as a staging area, and it should make it easier for you to see how page layout works. Now let's switch back to the markup. Inside the wrapper div, we have another div, which is the div that we will be working with. I've given it an ID of myDiv1 so that we can easily select it using CSS. Now, I'm going to switch over to our first style sheet here, and you can see that I've created some basic CSS styling just to kind of bootstrap the page, color in the wrapper, center it, and so on. For now, it's okay if you don't understand anything in the CSS file. Just be aware that some styling has already been applied to this page. Now, let's switch over to our style sheet. This is the style sheet where we'll be working and applying our CSS. So, first things first, you saw in the markup that we have a div inside of our wrapper div. However, we couldn't even see it. That's because it doesn't have a background color and it doesn't have anything inside of it. So even if it did have a background color, it wouldn't take up any space and would be completely collapsed. First, we're going to apply a background color. Now this video is about page layout, so we won't cover backgrounds until later. Again, just know that it's there. So first I'm going to select my div1 using an ID selector. And I'm going to type background, and I'll give it kind of an orange color. Now, because this page element doesn't have anything inside of it, we need to give it an explicit width and height if we want to see it. Normally, a page element will expand to the size of its content, but there's no text, images, or other divs taking up space. So the first property I'm going to teach you is called width. This one is pretty simple. So we're just going to type out width, and then I'll give it a value of 300 pixels and save. Now first, you type the word width followed by a colon, and then you can give your width either a pixel or a percentage value. In this case, I've given it a width of 300 pixels as denoted by the abbreviation px at the end. Also, make sure that every CSS property you type out ends with a semicolon, otherwise you'll get some unpredictable results. Next, let's take a look at the height property. This one works exactly the same as width, so we're just going to type height and give it a value of 300 pixels. Now, let's switch over to the browser and refresh. And now that we've added a width and height, the div actually takes up space. Pretty cool. Now, I've mentioned before that we could give width and height a percentage value. Let's try that. So I'll switch back over to my text editor, and I'm going to give my width a value of 99% and my height a value of 99% as well. So let's check this out in the browser. The percentage value we gave to the width and height properties was a percentage of the containing element, which is the wrapper in this case. I gave them each 99% so that you can see how they just barely come up to the edge of the element, but not quite. They're taking up 99% of the width and 99% of the height of their parent element, the wrapper. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch these back to 300 pixels. And now we're ready to move on to margin. By using the various margin properties, you can space your elements apart from one another. Think of margin as an invisible space that surrounds your element. Let's say that I wanted some margin on the left side of my div. So I could type margin left 25 pixels. And when I switch back over to the browser and refresh, you can see that our element has moved over by 25 pixels. So let's switch back to the text editor and take a look at this. I've simply typed out margin-left, a colon, followed by 25 pixels, and then a semicolon to end the line. Now let's try adding some margin to the top. So I'm just going to go to the next line and type margin top, and give it a value of 25 pixels, and go back to the browser and refresh. Now, sometimes you need to be careful when adding margin. By adding margin to the top, in this case, we've actually pushed down both our element and the parent element, rather than just pushing up against the top border of the parent. More on this in the next video. Now, in addition to margin left and margin top, there's also margin right and margin bottom. If we only want to modify one or two margins, this is fine, but there's a consolidated syntax that we can use. So let's switch back to the text editor and try that out. So I'm just going to type margin, which I've already done here, and type a colon, and then I'm going to type 25 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels, and 25 pixels. By simply typing the word margin and giving it 4 values separated by spaces, we can modify the top, right, bottom, and left margins in that order. Top, right, bottom, left. If we just give margin a single value like this, such as 25 pixels, it will apply a margin to all 4 sides. There is one more nifty shorthand that we can use. By typing margin and giving it 2 values like this, the first value will apply to the top and bottom of our element, and the second value will apply to the left and right. In this video, we looked at width, height, and margin. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at some more properties that can help us lay out our web pages.